Associate Professor of English Tim McAlpine. You're joining us in the Thomas D. Clark Reading Room of the Katie Merrill Library for Lindsey Wilson Conversations. And the way this works is you get to enjoy a beverage of your choice and discuss a topic that interests you. The beverage you've chosen for today is a Sprite, and the topic you've chosen is 18th century and science fiction ? And the reason we say ? Is because science fiction didn't really appear until the 1860s with the works of Jules Verne, but we're talking about the 18th century. So how are they related?
Well, if we want to go personal, or do we want to go in terms of the field, I can take it a couple ways. Personally, it's more a matter of, the interest in science fiction is more a matter of going back to my roots. I mean, all of us as readers develop in different ways. There are things we like early, and then hopefully we grow and mature and learn to read things that were hard to read earlier. And for me, science fiction was one of the things that came early. I mean, remember from being a junior high school student, just curling up with like C.S. Lewis's science fiction or Isaac Asimov, and the thing that came hard to me was realistic fiction. I mean, why would I read something about grown-ups doing grown-up things? I mean, I wanted spaceships and monsters and dragons and knights in armor and all that. So science fiction was sort of an early taste, and then it's one I've been able to enjoy coming back to. So those two didn't grow up together necessarily. Once I got into 18th century, though, I found some interesting, it is a field that does connect.
When science fiction began to emerge as a genre in the mid-19th century, was it taken as a serious form of literature by the public?
Well, it's hard to say when you could actually start talking about it as a genre that people would recognize and call science fiction. You had, you had Jules Verne, but he didn't talk about what he wrote as science fiction. It was scientific romances, which was similar to the terms that H.G. Wells used, and there were all sorts of different expressions for it, and we don't really think of science fiction as sort of a genre niche until the pulp magazines of, before the Second World War, and then when you get to writers like to editors really rather like Hugo Gernsback and John Campbell, then you start to think in terms of science fiction as a genre. And while some of those individual books might have been taken a bit seriously, the genre still has a major image problem. And you'll notice when you go to bookstores like, and I know this is one that Dwayne Vaughn's bookstore in West Lafayette, if the writer has prestige, like H.G. Wells, the work will go in the fiction section. If the writer doesn't have prestige, it's going to go in the science fiction section, and so it does get treated sort of as a second-class citizen, somewhat.
You mentioned earlier that science fiction has been used for social commentary. You think about the ways it's been used, or was used during the Civil Rights Movement, also during the Cold War. What is it about science fiction that makes it appealing to be used for social commentary?
The same way that Swift used Gulliver's Travels. You're free to step outside of England, avoid overtly stepping on people's toes, because you can always say, well, good heavens, I certainly didn't see any resemblance there. And so as Gulliver does, for instance, with in the first book of Gulliver's Travels, talking about the little Endians and the big Endians, and the dispute about which end of the egg to crack first, as a way of talking about Catholic-Protestant disputes, especially as they were played out in England. I mean, it's a wonderful way of doing it, and it's hard to see how he could have done that without going to Lilliput, because if you had made the connection directly in a straight prose exposition, and since Swift, by the way, if you remember, was a clergyman and did publish sermons, if Swift had tried to do that either in a sermon or in a serious tract on Protestant Catholic differences, especially as a Church of England clergyman, he would have been he would have been seen as trivializing an important issue and brought a lot down on himself.
50 years ago, maybe you could say that science fiction filled in the gaps between the answers that science had given us. In an age where science seems to have all the answers and be able to explain everything that we know, not only on Earth but in the universe, what's science fiction's role now?
We still haven't worked out the implications of everything, and there's still a lot more to imagine. Yes, we've gotten to the moon, so it's true you couldn't do. It would be awfully hard. Let's do a science fiction story about, say, a mission to the moon with 3 people and something goes wrong. Oh yeah, that's Apollo 13. Okay, that happened. So it's true that there are some things we couldn't. And certainly a writer doing, say Robinson with her Red Mars, Green Mars series, certainly has to write it differently than C.S. Lewis could write about Mars, back in the 1930s and 1940s. But there is still so much that is out there that we don't know. And I think science fiction is, I know the popular image is sort of the spaceships and ray guns, but I think as you sort of hint at, I mean, Frankenstein doesn't have anything to do with spaceships and ray guns. But anytime you talk about science and what happens if we achieve this, how does that change the equation?
Lindsey Wilson College Associate Professor of English, Tim McAlpine, thank you for joining us for Lindsey Wilson Conversations.
No problem. Can I keep the Sprite?
Yes, you can. Keep it.